The wind came down from the San Pedro Valley like a long sigh over the dry grasslands. The sky was copper and bruised with clouds, the kind that promised a storm. But the land below stayed still, waiting. Dust hung in the air, whispering against the mesquite trees and the bones of the earth. Somewhere beyond the low hills, a rider approached, slow, steady, and carrying the weight of too many yesterdays. His name was Caleb Harrison, 33 years old, a rancher by inheritance, a loner by choice. He'd once fought in the war between states, lost too many friends to both men in silence, and when the guns went quiet, he came west, to forget, to rebuild, maybe even to start over. His spread, the Double H, sat against a rim of red rock country, where cattle grazed on tough grass and rivers ran thin most months of the year. But Caleb wasn't thinking about cattle that morning. His mind was on the rumors. A small Apache band had been sighted near the ridge. Not hostile, just moving through, keeping to themselves. Still, settlers didn't like it. Fear traveled faster than truth in those days. Some said a group of ranchers were gathering to push them out before anything happened. Caleb didn't like the talk. He knew what panic could do to men. By noon, he was riding toward the canyon to check on a herd that had wandered too far. That's when he saw her. She stood barefoot by the creek, her dark hair loose and tangled from wind. She was gathering water in a clay pot, her eyes alert but calm. Not startled like a trapped animal, just cautious, measuring him. The color of her dress was faded blue, torn at the hem, and her arms were thin, though her posture held a quiet strength that spoke of someone who'd endured more than her years should allow. For a moment, neither moved. The water murmured between them. A hawk screamed above the canyon rim. Caleb lifted a hand, slow, peaceable. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said. The girl didn't answer. She tilted her head slightly as if she understood but chose silence. Caleb's voice softened. "You from the band up north? The ones camped by Salt Creek?" Still no words. She looked at him again, really looked, and there was something unreadable in her gaze. Not fear, not trust, something between. He took a step closer, then stopped when she shifted her weight, a flicker of warning in her eyes. "All right," he murmured. "I'll stay right here." Then from behind the ridge came a shout. Two riders, men from the neighboring ranch, rifles raised. Caleb cursed under his breath. "Get down," he hissed, motioning to her. She didn't move. "They'll think..." But he didn't finish because the shots cracked through the dry air like whipcords. One bullet hit the water beside her, sending up a sharp spray. Instinct took over. Caleb lunged, pulling her down behind a boulder as another shot whined past. She struggled against him for a heartbeat, wild and strong, before freezing, realizing he wasn't the one shooting. When the echoes died, Caleb raised his head and shouted, "Hold your fire!" Damn it, she's just a girl. The riders reined in, their horses stamping nervously. "You all right, Harrison?" one called. "Put those guns away before you kill someone." Caleb barked. They muttered something about savages and ought to be run off, but finally turned their horses back toward the ridge. The girl trembled beside him, her breathing fast. He waited until the hoofbeats faded before speaking. "They're gone. You're safe now." She looked at him, eyes bright with confusion. Or was it defiance? She said something in Apache, soft and low, and though Caleb didn't understand, the tone told him enough. She didn't trust him. "Name's Caleb," he said, tapping his chest. "Caleb." After a moment, she touched her hand to her own chest. "Nahala," she whispered. "Nahala," he repeated. The sound of it felt strange and beautiful in his mouth. He stood, offered his hand to help her up. She hesitated, then took it. Her fingers were cool and small against his calloused palm. That evening, the storm finally came. Rain swept across the valley, turning dust into mud and sky into chaos. Caleb brought Nahala to his cabin, not out of charity but out of a sense of duty. The hills were no place for anyone in a flash flood. Inside, the cabin was rough but clean. A wood stove, a narrow bed, a table with one chair, a rifle over the hearth. Nahala stood near the door, dripping wet, uncertain. Caleb poured coffee and set a tin cup before her. "Ain't got much, but it's warm," he said. She sniffed it, frowned, then took a cautious sip. Her expression softened. A small, flickering acceptance. Caleb found her an old blanket, gesturing for her to sit by the fire. She obeyed, though still watching him with wary eyes. He'd seen that look before. The look of someone who'd been hunted too many times to ever feel safe again. You got people nearby? He asked quietly. She shook her head. They gone? A pause. Then softly, killed. The word hit him like a blow. I'm sorry, he said. Nahala said nothing more, staring into the flames. Outside, thunder rolled over the plains. Inside, silence built between them, heavy and strange. Caleb felt the pull of something he didn't understand. A mix of guilt, pity, and a deep aching loneliness that he'd buried for years. He rose, paced once across the floor, then said, You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow I'll take you to Fort Bowie. The army'll— She turned sharply, eyes blazing. No fort, no soldiers, he stopped. They'll protect you. She shook her head, voice trembling. Soldiers kill my people. No fort. The fire cracked, throwing light across her face. Caleb saw the scar then, faint, running from her temple to her cheekbone. Old, but still visible. He understood without needing to ask. All right, he said quietly. No fort. For a long time they sat like that, the rancher and the Apache girl, strangers bound by chance and circumstance, while the rain whispered against the windows like ghosts remembering. The next morning, Caleb found her outside feeding the horses. She moved with quiet grace, her hands gentle on the animals. When she noticed him, she straightened, wiping her hands on her skirt. You plan on staying? He asked. She gave a small shrug. You want me go? He hesitated. No, I just don't know what's right for you. Nahala smiled faintly, the first real smile he'd seen. Right thing. Maybe not easy thing. He chuckled softly. You sound like you've been ranching all your life. She didn't answer, but her eyes warmed a little. Over the next few days, she stayed. Helped mend fences, fetched water, cooked simple meals. She spoke little English, but they found ways to communicate. Gestures, looks, shared laughter over misunderstandings. Caleb found himself looking forward to her company, though he didn't want to admit it even to himself. Then one evening, as the sun burned low over the mesas, something changed. He was fixing a broken latch on the barn door when he heard her voice behind him. Caleb, he turned. She stood close, closer than before, her eyes dark and searching. You good man, she said haltingly. Not like others. He didn't know how to answer. I just do what's right. She shook her head. No, you listen. You see, there was silence. Her hand lifted slightly, brushed his arm. A touch so light it could have been accidental, but it wasn't. Caleb felt his heartbeat stumble. Nahala, he began, but words fell short. Her eyes glistened with something unspoken. Don't, she whispered, voice barely audible. He leaned closer, unsure. Don't what? Don't stop. The words trembled between them like a spark. Caleb froze, misreading the moment, thinking she meant his kindness, his help, the fragile peace they'd found. He nodded slowly, not realizing her meaning ran deeper, far more vulnerable. But that night, everything changed when the storm returned, sudden and fierce. They were trapped again inside the cabin, the wind howling through the cracks. Lightning split the sky. Thunder shook the walls. Caleb stoked the fire, trying not to notice how the flickering light caught the curve of her face, the shine of her hair. She sat across from him, silent, eyes reflecting the flames. The air felt thick with something unsaid. Finally, she spoke. You think storm ends soon? Maybe, he said. But not before midnight. She nodded, then looked toward the window, her voice soft. In my tribe, storm mean change. Sky fight with earth. Make new day. We could use a new day, he murmured. She turned back to him, and for a moment time seemed to still. The thunder outside fading into the distance. Something fragile, dangerous, and beautiful hung between them. Dawn broke over the San Pedro Valley like a soft promise, though the sky still carried bruises from the previous night's storm. Puddles reflected the pale light, and the air smelled of wet earth and burned wood from the cabin's hearth. Caleb Harrison stepped outside, boots squelching in the mud, listening to the world waking slowly. The herd had survived, the fences mostly intact, but something about the valley felt heavier today. He turned toward the cabin, and there she was, Nahala, standing at the doorframe. Hair damp from rain, arms crossed, eyes surveying the horizon with that same quiet intensity that had first drawn his gaze. She had slept little, he could tell, because even in repose her posture was alert, wary of the world that had taken so much from her. Morning, he said, trying for lightness. She tilted her head, a faint smile touching her lips. Morning, she repeated in careful English. He nodded and went to fetch water from the creek, carrying the rhythm of the valley in his steps. The quiet moments between them were brief yet full of unspoken meaning. Every glance, every movement felt weighted with history. Neither of them could share completely, yet both understood instinctively. Inside, breakfast was simple: cornmeal porridge, a few scraps of bacon from the last pig, coffee for him, water for her. She sat small and composed, observing. Caleb realized he could speak, but she often spoke more through presence than words. There was dignity in that, a strength honed by survival and loss. He cleared his throat. "We need to talk," he said gently. Nahala looked up. "About what?" "The men from the ridge. They saw you yesterday." Her jaw tightened. "I know, they think—" "Same as all white men." He frowned. "Not all of us. I never wanted them to shoot. Never wanted any harm to come to you." She looked away toward the rising sun. "You helped me, I know. But they judge like storm. No choice, only fear." He swallowed, feeling the weight of that truth. The world he lived in, the frontier he'd chosen, was full of men who'd trade humanity for fear. And now somehow Nahala had become caught between them, a reminder of everything he wanted to protect but couldn't fully control. They worked the ranch together through the day. She helped him mend a broken fence, her hands agile and strong, the way she moved natural with the land. He watched her from time to time, struck by the quiet dignity she carried even in mud-stained skirts and wet hair. Then, a messenger arrived, a thin boy from the neighboring town, breathless, delivering a letter for Caleb. The envelope was plain, ink smudged from rain. He opened it, frowning. The words inside were brief but filled with threat. "We saw her. You keep that Apache girl close, we'll make sure you regret it. Your cattle, your life, all at risk. Consider this warning." Caleb crumpled the paper in his hand, his jaw tight. He glanced at Nahala, who stood nearby, watching silently. She didn't speak. Instead, she reached her hand to touch his arm lightly, a grounding gesture that reminded him why he had stayed, why he had pulled her from the creek and sheltered her during the storm. "They won't scare me," he said finally. "Not now, not ever." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she nodded. "We survive, together." That night the wind rose again. Not a storm this time, but a cold, biting draft from the north. Caleb stoked the fire and poured coffee, the amber liquid catching the firelight like liquid gold. Nahala sat across from him, quiet, watching the flames reflect in his eyes. Finally she spoke. "You think about me?" He blinked. The question hung between them like a fragile glass ornament. He didn't answer immediately. "I think about keeping you safe. That's what matters." Her hand moved, slow, deliberate, resting lightly on his. The touch was soft, almost shy, but it carried a gravity that made his chest tighten. "I trust you," she whispered. He swallowed hard. "I trust you too, more than I ever trusted anyone." They sat like that for a long moment, the fire crackling, the night pressing against the cabin walls. It was a silence filled with possibility, with unspoken yearning, with the tension of two people on the edge of something they both feared to name. Days passed, and life on the ranch grew tense. Rumors of Apache movement spread, cattle rustlers prowled, and the neighboring ranchers' hostility simmered like coals under ash. Caleb rode daily to check the herds, often with Nahala accompanying him, moving quietly on the periphery, observing, helping, alert to every sound of danger. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mesas, a rider approached, a man from the Ridge Ranch, hat pulled low, boots caked in mud. He reined in his horse abruptly, staring at Caleb. "You keeping that girl?" he demanded. Caleb stood slowly, hands visible. "I'm not hiding anyone." "She's my guest," the man spat. "She's not welcome here." "You're asking for trouble, Harrison. Trouble you can't handle." Caleb felt a hard edge of anger rise. "I handle what needs handling." "You best ride back before someone regrets it." The man's eyes flicked toward Nahala, who stepped closer to Caleb instinctively, her hands tightening. "You see her," he said. "She belongs with her people. Not here. And if I say no," Caleb asked evenly. "Then you're a fool," the man said, and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and threat behind him. Nahala stayed close to Caleb. "They want you fight me," she murmured, voice low. "They want many things," he said. "They won't get what matters, not to me, not to us." Her eyes softened, a flicker of warmth, trust, and something deeper, a bond forged in shared danger, and the quiet understanding of each other's pain. That night, sleep was elusive. Caleb lay awake, listening to the wind, thinking about Nahala, thinking about the life they could carve together if the world would let them. He didn't understand why he felt such a fierce protective pull toward her, why her presence unsettled and completed him all at once. And Nahala, lying on the small bed across the room, stared at the ceiling, hands clasped, thinking about Caleb. He was not like the others. He saw her, respected her even when she felt broken. For the first time in months, maybe years, she allowed herself a small hope. The following morning, they rode out to check on the northern fence line. The wind was sharper now, carrying the promise of a change in season. The valley stretched endlessly, raw and beautiful. But danger lingered in every shadow. Nahala rode beside Caleb, silent but alert. He noticed how her eyes caught every movement. A hawk circling above, a rabbit darting through the brush, the distant rise of smoke from a campfire. She was more than a guest on his land. She was a guardian, a presence that made him feel more alive than he had in years. Then they saw them. 3 riders, distant, moving toward the ranch. Caleb squinted, heart tightening. Rustlers or worse. He nudged his horse forward, signaling Nahala to stay close. As the riders drew nearer, one of them waved a hand, not in greeting, but as a warning. Caleb recognized the ridgemen. Their intent was clear. Confrontation was inevitable. Nahala leaned slightly toward him. "You ready?" she asked. He met her gaze. "I'm ready. We face it together." And in that instant, as the sun burned low and shadows stretched across the valley, a silent promise passed between them, one forged by fire, rain, and the harsh truths of the frontier. The world outside might not understand, might not forgive, but here in the vast open plains, Caleb and Nahala found an alliance, a fragile hope, and the first stirrings of something that could not be denied. They rode forward, side by side, into the coming storm of men and fate, knowing that the next hours would test them, their courage, their hearts, and the bond that had begun one night in the rain. The valley was quiet that morning, the sun barely cresting the mesas, casting long golden shadows across the dry grass. Caleb Harrison rode along the northern fence line, Nahala beside him, her eyes scanning the distant ridges with a precision that only came from years of living close to danger. The previous day's confrontation with the ridgemen still echoed in Caleb's mind, a hard reminder that threats in the Old West rarely faded. "They'll come again," Caleb said quietly, almost to himself. Nahala didn't answer immediately. Her gaze stayed fixed on a distant rise. "They always come. Men afraid of what they cannot control," she said softly, her English halting but precise. He turned to her, watching her profile in the morning light, the high cheekbones, the dark hair caught in the wind, the quiet strength radiating from her even as she spoke so calmly of danger. "Then we will be ready," he said. She looked at him then, eyes dark and unyielding. "You cannot protect everything," she said. "Sometimes you must fight. Sometimes you must choose who lives." Caleb swallowed, feeling the weight of her words. She had survived more than he could imagine, had learned the truths of life and death in ways he never had to. He nodded, trusting her judgment implicitly, though the thought of confrontation made his chest tighten. By mid-morning, smoke appeared on the horizon. Caleb squinted, signaling Nahala to dismount. She moved with quiet grace, landing softly in the grass. "Men from the ridge," he murmured. She nodded, eyes narrowing. "Not soldiers, hunters, they test fear." Caleb's hand brushed the rifle slung across his back. "I'm not afraid of them," he said, though the truth was more complicated. He did not fear death. He had seen too much. But he feared for Nahala, for her safety, for the fragile trust that had begun between them. They moved toward the rising smoke, careful, quiet, like shadows themselves. The ridgemen were setting up a trap, a makeshift barricade along the narrow pass, intending to block cattle and intimidate anyone who tried to cross. Caleb recognized the signs instantly. They were confident, reckless, and cruel in the way only men used to power could be. Nahala pointed silently toward a narrow ledge above the trap. "We watch first, then strike." Caleb followed, climbing carefully, the rough stone biting into his palms. When they reached the top, they could see everything. 3 men, rifles leveled, faces twisted with anger and expectation. Caleb counted them, memorized their movements. Nahala beside him exuded calm, a predator in the quiet morning, assessing, waiting. "We cannot just shoot," she said softly. "We must make them hesitate." Caleb nodded. "Then we wait." The morning stretched, tension building like a rope ready to snap. Caleb and Nahala watched as the ridgemen fidgeted, confident that the valley belonged to them. Every step they took, every gesture revealed arrogance and ignorance, and Caleb realized something dangerous. They underestimated not only him, but Nahala. Finally a shot rang out, not from Caleb, but from a branch snapping under a horse's hoof. The ridgemen flinched, guns twitching. Caleb and Nahala moved swiftly, taking advantage of their distraction. Caleb's voice rang across the pass, "You don't belong here." The men turned, startled. One raised his rifle. Caleb moved first, stepping into the open, heart pounding, hands steady. Nahala followed, nimble and silent, flanking him with the precision of someone who had lived her whole life in survival. The confrontation was tense, a deadly dance of words and threat. Caleb's voice was low but firm, carrying authority he had never used in such a way before. "Leave now or you'll regret it." The men laughed nervously. "And if we don't?" Nahala stepped forward, her voice clear, commanding even in broken English. "You leave. You die if you stay." For a moment the ridgeman hesitated. Her presence, her confidence, struck them harder than Caleb's words ever could. One of them muttered, "Crazy girl." Caleb's jaw tightened. "She's not crazy. She's the reason you don't want to fight me today. The bluff, the truth, the danger. It was all in that moment." The ridgemen slowly backed away, muttering threats and promises of return, but retreating nonetheless. Nahala exhaled quietly. Caleb glanced at her, admiration and something deeper stirring in his chest. She had saved him in a way neither of them had anticipated. That evening, back at the cabin, Caleb poured whiskey into 2 tin cups. He handed one to Nahala, who hesitated, then accepted it with a small smile. "You're brave," he said quietly. "More than I've ever been." She shook her head, drinking slowly. "No brave, only survive." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm glad you're here," he said softly. She met his gaze, holding it. "Me too, Caleb." The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken desire. Their hands brushed, then lingered. Caleb's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to stay composed, aware that any wrong move could shatter the fragile trust between them. Yet the longing was undeniable. "Don't," she whispered, the word barely audible over the wind outside. He leaned closer, voice low. "I won't, not now, not ever." They sat together in silence, the fire crackling, shadows dancing across the walls, both aware that the world outside was unforgiving. But inside, for this fleeting moment, they were free. The following days brought no rest. Caleb worked the ranch, patrolling fences, checking cattle, while Nahala stayed close, helping with chores but also watching the horizon, alert to any sign of danger. They spoke less now, understanding that words could sometimes betray the fragile peace they'd built. One afternoon, a stranger arrived, a tall man on a black horse, face hidden under a wide hat. He rode directly to Caleb, dismounting smoothly. "Harrison," he said, voice deep and rough. "I'm bounty hunter looking for men who crossed me. Heard you might have Apache girl." Caleb's hand went to his rifle, but he kept his voice steady. "I don't know what you mean." "She's a guest here," the man sneered. "I know exactly what I mean. Don't try to hide. There's money in bringing her in, alive or dead." Nahala stepped forward, silent but deadly in presence. Caleb realized in that instant that she was more than just a girl he protected. She was a force. Her eyes locked on the bounty hunter, unyielding. Caleb felt a surge of pride but also fear. The threat was real, more dangerous than the ridgemen. They would come back, and next time they might not hesitate to kill. He made a decision. "We leave," he said. "Tonight." "Pack light," Nahala nodded. "Yes, together." That night, under the cover of darkness, they rode out. The valley was silent, only the distant howl of a coyote breaking the stillness. Caleb felt her hand brush his, holding on lightly but firmly. It was a promise, a lifeline, a tether binding them together against the dangers they could not yet see. As they rode toward the northern hills, the moon rising silver and full above them, Caleb realized something profound. In Nahala, he had found not only companionship but purpose, love, and a sense of destiny he had long believed lost. And Nahala, riding beside him, knew that for the first time, she could trust another person completely. The world outside might be cruel, unforgiving, filled with men who saw only fear and profit, but here, together, they had found something stronger than fear, a bond that could endure storms, threats, and the harshest truths of the frontier. And deep in her heart, she whispered once more. Don't stop. Caleb heard her, and this time he knew exactly what she meant. The hills beyond San Pedro Valley were steep, rocky, and treacherous, but Caleb Harrison and Nahala moved through them with careful precision. The night air was cool and sharp, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant pine. Each step brought them farther from the ridgemen, farther from bounty hunters, but also deeper into uncertainty. Nahala rode beside him, eyes scanning every shadow, ears tuned to every sound. She rode like the wind, agile and quiet, but Caleb could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw tightened each time a twig snapped. Survival had taught her vigilance, but he wondered if she ever allowed herself rest, ever allowed herself to feel safe. We cannot stay in one place too long, she murmured, voice low and steady. They track. Always, Caleb nodded. We'll find a safe spot, hidden. Far from the valley, far from men who cannot understand. She glanced at him, dark eyes catching the moonlight. You think I afraid? No, he said immediately. I think you're stronger than any man I've met. She looked away, expression softening. Strength only means survive longer. Caleb studied her in the shadows, admiring her courage and resolve. There was a quiet intensity about her, a fire that no storm, no threat could ever extinguish. And yet he sensed the loneliness beneath it, the weight of being hunted, the burden of trust broken too many times. They rode in silence until the first hints of dawn brushed the horizon. Caleb guided them to a hidden creek, a place he had discovered years ago while exploring the hills. A natural sanctuary, shielded from view, with water, small game, and enough cover to rest. Nahala dismounted first, moving with feline grace to inspect the area. Safe, for now, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Caleb set down the saddlebags, taking a deep breath of the cold morning air. We'll stay here for the day. Rest, eat, plan. Nahala nodded, crouching to examine tracks along the creek's muddy banks. She traced each mark with careful fingers, muttering in Apache under her breath. Caleb didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. Vigilance, caution, anticipation. She was always listening, always reading the land like a story written in the soil. After a meager breakfast of dried meat and bread, they settled near the water. Nahala sat cross-legged, her hands brushing the surface of the creek, sending ripples across the still water. Caleb watched her, feeling something stir deep in his chest. Affection, protectiveness, desire, all tangled together. You think they follow? She asked. Yes, he admitted. But we've lost them for now. She looked at him, eyes searching. You trust me? With my life, he said without hesitation. She nodded slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing just a fraction. For a moment they allowed themselves silence, listening to the rush of the creek, the distant call of a hawk, the soft rustle of leaves. Hours passed and they moved cautiously through the hills, hunting small game and gathering roots. The physical exertion gave them a shared rhythm, a fragile bond of trust and cooperation. Caleb noticed how her hands moved with precision and care, how her eyes missed nothing, how even in quiet moments, she seemed alert to both danger and beauty in the landscape. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Caleb set up a small fire. Nahala sat close, warming her hands over the flames, her face glowing in the light. You never tell story of your people? He asked, curiosity edged with caution. She shook her head, gaze fixed on the fire. Many dead. Many gone story. Dangerous if told, he nodded, understanding. Some stories carried the weight of loss too great to speak aloud, memories too sharp to share. Then maybe one day when you feel safe you will tell me. She glanced at him, a shadow of a smile crossing her face. Maybe one day. The fire crackled and the air grew thick with anticipation. Caleb's hand brushed hers almost accidentally, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she let the contact linger, a silent acknowledgement of something growing between them. A bond forged through danger, trust and shared vulnerability. That night, the wind rose, rustling the leaves and carrying a chill through the hills. Caleb kept watch while Nahala slept lightly, one eye always open. He thought of the ridgemen, the bounty hunter, and the dangers that would always hunt them. But for the first time, he also thought of something else. A future, however fragile, where she might stay with him, where they could carve a life together in a world that refused to forgive or understand. He drifted to sleep, sitting beside the fire, only to wake hours later to the sound of hooves, distant but unmistakable. He nudged Nahala awake, whispering urgently, "Riders, coming." Her eyes snapped open, dark and alive with understanding. "Hide, fast." They moved quickly, dragging the fire to the edge of the hill to minimize light. Slipping behind a natural rock outcrop, the riders passed, unaware of the hidden figures in the shadows. Caleb's heart pounded, adrenaline sharp in his veins. "They seek us," he whispered. "They always seek," she replied. "But we move." "Always," he nodded. The unspoken truth hung heavy in the night. The world would never leave them in peace. Yet in that darkness, crouched together behind the rocks, they found a small measure of comfort in each other's presence. The following days tested them further. Food was scarce, and the hills offered little in shelter from the elements. A sudden storm swept through, rain soaking them to the bone, thunder splitting the air, lightning illuminating the jagged landscape in sharp, blinding flashes. Nahala moved instinctively, shielding Caleb when a branch fell near him. "Safe, stay," she commanded, eyes flashing with urgency. He realized as he watched her move that she was no longer just a survivor. She was his protector as much as he was hers. Every glance, every touch, every shared breath deepened the bond that had begun on that stormy night weeks ago. When the storm passed, they huddled together under a small overhang, shivering, soaked, but alive. Caleb brushed water from her hair, their hands lingering, fingers intertwining almost naturally. "We survive," he whispered, voice trembling with emotion. "We survive. Together," she replied. The words were more than promise. They were a vow. A fragile, dangerous vow in a world that sought to tear them apart at every turn. By the time they returned to the valley, the Ridgemen had spread rumors. The Apache girl had been taken. The rancher was foolish and trouble was certain. Caleb and Nahala knew the challenges were only beginning. Yet through it all, they had discovered something more valuable than safety. Trust, connection, and the stirring of love in a place where danger had once reigned supreme. And as they rode into the golden glow of the setting sun, Nahala whispered once more, almost reverently, "Don't stop." Caleb felt the weight of the words, the depth of meaning, and he knew without question that he would never stop protecting her, never stop trusting her, never stop feeling this impossible, beautiful bond that had grown between them. The valley had changed since Caleb Harrison and Nahala first fled into the hills. The earth was harder now, the grass brittle under their boots, the streams running lower than ever. Danger, however, had not diminished. The Ridgemen and bounty hunters were still out there, circling like predators waiting for a mistake, a misstep. Caleb rode ahead, scanning the horizon, eyes sharp, muscles taut with the tension of perpetual vigilance. Behind him, Nahala moved silently, almost blending with the shadows of the trees, her dark hair whipping in the wind. She had learned the land well in the days since they fled. Her instincts were keen, her senses finely tuned to every subtle shift in the environment. "We cannot linger," she said, her voice low, steady. "They follow, always." Caleb nodded, swallowing hard. "I know, but we can rest soon. Just a little farther. I promise." Her eyes flicked to him, dark and assessing. "Promise. Must keep." He gave a small smile, but it didn't reach the tension in his jaw. Promises were fragile in this world. Fragile like trust, like hope, like the bond growing between them. Yet he could not help but want to keep every one of them for her. They rode through a narrow canyon, jagged rocks rising like ancient sentinels on either side. The path was treacherous, the horses cautious. Caleb felt every slip, every loose stone beneath the hooves. He kept his hand close to his rifle, though he hoped it would not be needed. Nahala, riding slightly behind, moved with the fluid grace of someone born to survive, her eyes scanning for signs of pursuit. Suddenly, a branch snapped. Distant, faint, but unmistakable. Caleb froze, signaling Nahala with a slight tilt of his head. She nodded and both dismounted, moving quietly into the shadow of the rocks. 3 men appeared at the mouth of the canyon, rifles slung loosely, speaking in rough tones. Caleb recognized them immediately. Bounty hunters, intent clear in the glint of their eyes and the curve of their hands near triggers. Nahala crouched low, her gaze calculating. "We fight, only if must," she whispered. Caleb nodded. "We survive first." They waited, breathing shallow, the horses tense nearby. The men passed slowly, their conversation barely audible. Caleb felt the pull of adrenaline, the fear of discovery, but he also felt the presence of Nahala beside him, steady and unflinching. Together they were more than the sum of their parts. Together they were dangerous in ways these men could not predict. Once the threat had passed, they continued along a narrow ridge. The sun hung low, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. Caleb could feel the fatigue setting into his muscles, but he pressed onward. Nahala stayed close, speaking little, moving like a shadow, vigilant, alive. "We need shelter," he said finally, voice strained. "A place hidden. Until danger passes," Nahala nodded. She scanned the terrain, eyes sharp, then pointed toward a cluster of boulders partially hidden by scrub. "Here, safe." They approached carefully, securing the area, checking for tracks, ensuring no one had discovered the spot. Once satisfied, Caleb set down the saddlebags and Nahala began arranging the space to make it livable. There was a rhythm in these actions, a silent communication, a shared understanding that words could not fully capture. That night, as they huddled near the small fire, exhaustion overtook them. Caleb's hand brushed against Nahala's almost unintentionally, but she didn't pull away. The touch lingered, carrying the weight of unspoken emotion. "You trust me?" he asked softly, eyes fixed on hers. She nodded, a shadow of a smile. "Always at Caleb, then," he began, voice low, trembling slightly. "I will protect you, no matter what." She leaned closer, her forehead nearly touching his. You." The words were simple, fragile, but in the wilderness around them they carried the weight of entire lifetimes. The fire crackled, shadows dancing across the rocks, and for a moment the world beyond their hiding place ceased to exist. The following days tested them even further. Food was scarce and the terrain grew more unforgiving. Rainstorms swept through unexpectedly, turning trails into mudslides, rivers into torrents. They scavenged, hunted, and rationed carefully, knowing that any mistake could cost them their lives. Caleb marveled at Nahala's resourcefulness, the way she spotted edible roots, tracked small game, and improvised traps. She was more than a companion. She was a partner in survival, a force that made him stronger just by being near. One afternoon, as they rested by a creek, Caleb spoke quietly.
"Do you ever think
about the future?" Nahala looked at him, expression thoughtful. "Future dangerous. But maybe, with you, yes." He reached out, brushing mud from her cheek. "We'll find a way. Together." She met his gaze, eyes shimmering with emotion. Together. But the world outside was relentless. One evening, as the sun bled red into the horizon, they heard the distant sound of hooves. Caleb froze, scanning the hills, heart hammering. Nahala's hand went to his arm, steadying him. "They found us," she whispered. 3 riders emerged from the shadows. Bounty hunters, relentless, armed, intent clear. Caleb's mind raced. They were trapped on the ridge with only narrow paths leading down. Fighting was inevitable. Nahala moved beside him, her presence a calm anchor. "We fight." "Together," Caleb nodded, gripping his rifle. The first shots rang out, echoing across the canyon. Dust and gravel flew as the horses reared. Caleb fired, narrowly missing one man, while Nahala moved with surprising swiftness, taking cover and returning fire. The fight was brutal, tense, and desperate. Caleb felt the weight of every decision. The stakes impossibly high. A shot grazed his shoulder, burning, but he didn't falter. Nahala's presence beside him, steady and unflinching, gave him strength. Together they held off the attackers, forcing them to retreat, at least temporarily. When the last gunshot faded, Caleb slumped against a boulder, breathing hard, adrenaline coursing. Nahala knelt beside him, her eyes scanning his body for injuries. "You hurt?" she asked, voice low. "Nothing." "Serious," he said, wincing slightly. She reached out, brushing hair from his face. "You should rest." He met her gaze, feeling a rush of emotion too deep for words. "Nahala, She placed a finger on his lips. "No words, safe. Now." They sat together in silence, the night sky stretching endlessly above them, filled with stars, wind carrying the scent of rain and earth. In that moment, the dangers of the world beyond faded, leaving only them. 2 people bound by trust, survival, and a fragile, burgeoning love. And as she whispered again, almost reverently, "Don't. Stop." Caleb knew he never would. The valley lay in restless quiet as dawn broke, streaking the sky with pale gold and violet. Caleb, Harrison, and Nahala crouched behind a rocky outcrop, surveying the ridge where the bounty hunters and ridgemen had gathered overnight. Tension hummed in the air like the electric charge before a summer storm, and every rustle of wind carried a warning. "They'll come down soon," Caleb whispered, voice low, steady despite the ache in his shoulder from the previous skirmish. Nahala's dark eyes scanned the terrain, lips pressed tight. "We ready?" Caleb nodded. Together they had survived storms, betrayal, and the harshest wilderness, yet today would test them in ways they had never imagined. They moved carefully, descending the ridge in silence, using every shadow and rock for cover. The hunters were well armed, but Caleb had a plan. Improvised, dangerous, and desperate, yet born from experience and necessity. Nahala followed his lead, her trust absolute, her movements graceful and precise. "Wait for my signal," he murmured. She nodded, fingers brushing his arm, a brief touch that spoke of solidarity, trust, and the unspoken love that had grown between them. The ridgemen and bounty hunters were setting up another trap along the valley floor, unaware that Caleb and Nahala were observing from higher ground. The air was tense, the silence almost unbearable, punctuated only by the occasional cry of a hawk circling above. Caleb counted them carefully, 6 men in total, all armed, all confident in their advantage. But they underestimated 2 things, Caleb's cunning and Nahala's skill. The plan unfolded with precision. Caleb signaled Nahala, who darted down a hidden path unseen, and positioned herself behind a cluster of boulders overlooking the trap. She readied a small rifle he had given her, her hands steady, eyes sharp. Caleb took a deep breath and stepped into view, shouting a challenge. "This valley belongs to no man who preys on the weak." The hunters and ridgemen turned, rifles raising. Caleb dodged behind a boulder, firing carefully, each shot precise, forcing them to scatter. From above, Nahala took aim, her first shot catching a rider in the shoulder, sending him tumbling from his horse. The others fired wildly, panic setting in as Caleb and Nahala moved with terrifying coordination, appearing and disappearing like shadows. Caleb felt the rush of adrenaline, his pulse pounding, but he was acutely aware of Nahala beside him, every motion in sync, every glance a silent communication. Together, they were unstoppable. The fight continued, dust and smoke swirling, horses rearing, the sound of gunfire echoing across the valley. Caleb and Nahala pressed their advantage, her presence beside him a constant reassurance. He realized as bullets flew and men fell back in retreat, that he had never felt so alive, so connected, so utterly dependent on another soul. Finally, the last of the bounty hunters turned and fled, cursing, wounded, and defeated. Caleb lowered his rifle, chest heaving, eyes scanning for any remaining threat. Nahala emerged from her cover, expression calm, though the slight rise and fall of her chest betrayed her exertion. "All gone," she whispered, voice low, almost reverent. Caleb stepped toward her, brushing mud and dust from her coat. "We did it, together." She met his gaze, dark eyes softening. Together. The valley was silent once more, the threat gone, the storm of human malice finally quelled. Caleb and Nahala stood in the golden light of late afternoon, surveying the land they had fought for, survived for, and now claimed as their own. "We cannot stay here forever," Caleb said quietly, though a smile tugged at his lips. "But for now, this is ours," Nahala nodded. "For now, safe." Caleb reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. The physical connection mirrored the deeper bond they had forged. Trust, respect, love, and a shared determination to survive and thrive against all odds. "I don't know what the future holds," he admitted, voice low, intimate. "But I know I want you in it. Always." Nahala's eyes glistened in the fading light. "I want same. Always. You." The words, simple and fragile, carried the weight of every storm, every shot fired, every narrow escape. They were promises not made lightly, promises born of fire, rain, and the harsh truths of frontier life. As evening fell, they returned to the cabin, exhausted but triumphant. Caleb stoked the fire while Nahala prepared a simple meal. The cabin, once a place of refuge, now felt like home. A home they had claimed not through ownership of land alone, but through courage, resilience, and love. They sat together by the fire, hands brushing, bodies close enough to feel warmth, the flickering light casting dancing shadows across the walls. "Don't stop," she whispered once more, the words laden with emotion, desire, and trust. Caleb leaned closer, voice husky. "I won't. Not now, not ever." Their lips met in a tentative, trembling kiss, the first full acknowledgement of the longing that had grown between them since the stormy night in the creek. It was gentle yet electric, a culmination of weeks of danger, fear, trust, and unspoken emotion. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only the fire, the cabin, and the two of them. Two souls who had endured impossible trials and found something extraordinary in each other. In the days that followed, Caleb and Nahala worked together to rebuild, tending the land, repairing fences, and preparing for whatever threats might still linger. But the fear that had once dominated their lives was replaced slowly by hope, fragile, tentative, but real. They spoke more openly now, shared stories, laughter, and even quiet moments of tenderness. Caleb learned bits of Nahala's language, and she learned more English. Their bond deepened, no longer solely about survival, but about companionship, understanding, and love that had blossomed against the harshest of odds. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Caleb stood outside the cabin, watching the valley glow with amber light. Nahala joined him, hand slipping into his naturally, fingers intertwining. "We made it," she said softly. Caleb nodded, heart full. "We did. Together. Always." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in a long while, both allowed themselves to believe that life could hold something more than fear. That love, trust, and survival could coexist in a world as wild and unforgiving as the Old West. The wind carried the scent of the valley, the creek, the hills, a reminder of all they had endured and all they had yet to discover. And beneath the vast sky stretching endlessly above them, Caleb and Nahala held each other close, knowing that whatever storms came next, they would face them as one. "Don't stop," she whispered again, and he kissed her forehead, pressing the promise into the moment, knowing that the word was more than plea. It was the heart of everything they had found together. And in the quiet, golden light of the valley, with danger behind them and a future ahead, they finally allowed themselves to imagine a life that was not just about survival, but about love, hope, and the promise of tomorrow, the end.